The day Rob Reiner and Michelle Reiner were found dead was a day that would shock Hollywood, stun the world, and shake one family to its core. Imagine waking up in a lavish Brentwood estate, the sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, only to stumble upon a scene that no one should ever have to witness in their lifetime. For Romy Reiner, the youngest daughter of the couple, this nightmare became reality. The bodies of her parents, Rob, 78, and Michelle, 70, were discovered in what should have been a sanctuary of family and safety, a $13.5 million home in one of Los Angeles' most exclusive neighborhoods. But what Romy found that day was anything but safe. It was violent, shocking, and utterly incomprehensible. Her world shattered in an instant, and with it, the sense of normalcy she had carried her whole life. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Romy's discovery wasn't just about the immediate shock of seeing her parents lifeless. It was about the gnawing realization that the crime scene hinted at something far darker, something that went beyond random tragedy. She immediately told authorities about a family member she considered dangerous, someone who she felt should be a suspect. That person was her own brother, Nick Reiner, 32, who lived in the guest house on the property. His arrest later that night sent ripples through Hollywood and the true crime world alike. But before the world knew of Nick's involvement, before headlines splashed the story across every major news outlet, Romy faced a horrifying decision: how to process grief, fear, and betrayal all at once. And in the midst of this tragedy, a separate storm was brewing. One that had nothing to do with the investigation. The funeral of Rob and Michelle Reiner, a man whose name is synonymous with Hollywood classics, and a woman whose life was intertwined with both the glamour and pressure of the industry, became a lightning rod of controversy. For figures, household names, would be denied entry, and the reason would ignite public curiosity. Clint Eastwood, Billy Crystal, Mel Brooks, and Donald Trump. Each of them had connections. Personal, professional, or ideological, but Romy Reiner was adamant. She didn't want them there, and she made that decision known. It was bold, it was headline-grabbing, and it was, for many, shocking. Why would a grieving daughter refuse to let such prominent figures attend her parents' funeral? And more importantly, what does it reveal about the complicated layers of family, celebrity, and power? The story begins with the night of the murders, a night that was supposed to be ordinary, a night that turned into a nightmare. Rob and Michelle were found stabbed, a violent act that defied understanding. The news broke like a thunderclap across social media and news outlets. People who had admired the couple, who had seen Rob Reiner's films as a constant in their lives and appreciated Michelle's quiet presence in the Hollywood landscape, were left stunned. And then, the revelation that their own son, Nick, was under arrest shattered any remaining illusion of safety. This wasn't just another Hollywood crime. It was a familial disaster, one that raised questions about trust, betrayal, and the fragile veneer of perfection that Hollywood families often present to the world. But amid this horror, the details that drew the most attention weren't just the murders themselves. They were the reactions, the choices, and the statements that followed. Romy Reiner's anger and determination to protect her parents' legacy became almost as compelling as the crime itself. She didn't just grieve in silence. She spoke out. She asserted control over the situation, and she made one decision that would become a focal point of media coverage: the decision to deny entry to some of the most recognizable figures in the world. There was speculation everywhere. Rumors about why Clint Eastwood, Billy Crystal, Mel Brooks, and Donald Trump weren't welcome spread like wildfire. Some wondered if it was personal, if it was a statement, or if it was simply a protective measure during an already emotionally volatile time. Romy's motives, though private, became public conversation almost immediately. In the first moments of this story, one has to grapple with the complexity of human emotion. Here is a woman, 27 years old, confronted with the sudden deaths of her parents, facing the reality that her brother might have committed the unthinkable, and simultaneously navigating the intrusion of media, celebrity, and public scrutiny. Imagine the psychological weight of having to make funeral arrangements while under the public microscope. The choice to exclude prominent figures, then, was not a trivial one. It was a decision that reflected anger, grief, and perhaps a need to reclaim control in a world that had become chaotic overnight. And yet, this decision only raised more questions. Did Romy fear that these figures would overshadow the morning? Did she believe their presence would change the narrative, or worse, disrespect her parents' memory? The answers were unclear, but the tension was palpable, and it set the stage for a story that would unfold with dramatic, shocking twists. The broader context of this tragedy cannot be ignored. Rob Reiner was not just a filmmaker. He was an icon of Hollywood, responsible for classics that spanned decades. His influence was immense, touching not only audiences worldwide, but also the very fabric of the entertainment industry. Michelle, equally admired though quieter in the public eye, had cultivated a life of elegance, discretion, and support for those around her. Their deaths were not just a family tragedy. They were a cultural shockwave. And within this shockwave, the intersection of Hollywood prestige, familial loyalty, and raw human emotion created a narrative that was impossible to ignore. Romy's decisions, Nick's arrest, the uninvited guests, each element was a thread in a story that demanded attention, analysis, and, ultimately, understanding. The public's fascination with this story was inevitable. Here was a narrative that combined the allure of Hollywood with the primal intensity of familial betrayal. There were all the elements of a gripping tale: shocking acts, legendary figures, moral dilemmas, and unresolved questions that begged for answers. And the first question that everyone seemed to ask was simple yet profound. Why were Clint Eastwood, Billy Crystal, Mel Brooks, and Donald Trump turned away from a funeral? The answer, as we would learn, was complicated, layered with emotion, and rooted in a combination of grief, distrust, and the need to protect the sanctity of a private family moment. Each of these figures carried a weight of expectation, a history with the Reiners, and potential influence on public perception. Romy's refusal was a declaration of autonomy in a world that often strips individuals of privacy and control, especially in the shadow of tragedy. Yet, even as the public fixated on celebrity involvement, the underlying human story remained compelling. Romy's rage, heartbreak, and cautious decision-making were relatable on a fundamental level. Who among us hasn't faced moments of betrayal, grief, or the need to protect our own in the face of chaos? In a sense, the uninvited guests became symbolic, not just of Hollywood prominence, but of the intrusion of the outside world into personal tragedy. The story of the Reiners was, at its core, a story about family, loyalty, and the boundaries we set to safeguard those we love, even when the world is watching. By the time the funeral approached, tensions were at a fever pitch. Media outlets speculated endlessly about who would attend, who would be barred, and what this might say about the family's internal dynamics. Romy's decision to exclude 4 of the most notable public figures was not merely a logistical choice. It was a statement. It was a statement about respect, privacy, and control, and it raised the stakes for everyone involved. For the Reiner family, it was a way to reclaim some sense of agency in a moment when they had lost almost everything. For the public, it became a puzzle, a scandal, and a point of endless discussion. And for the investigation, it became yet another layer of complexity, one that investigators, media, and the world were compelled to navigate. In this story, every detail matters. The location of the estate, the timing of events, the relationships between family members, the public personas of those involved. All of these elements interweave to create a narrative that is both heartbreaking and fascinating. Romy Reiner's anger, Nick's suspected involvement, and the media frenzy surrounding uninvited guests are not just sensational details. They are the human heartbeat of a story that forces us to confront the fragility of life, the complexity of family, and the consequences of choices made under extreme pressure. And as we move forward into this story, one truth becomes clear: the initial discovery was only the beginning. The ripple effects, the decisions, the fury, and the secrets that followed would shape the narrative in ways no one could have predicted. As the sun rose over Brentwood that fateful day, it illuminated not just a scene of tragedy, but the beginning of a story filled with betrayal, grief, and shocking revelations. Romy Reiner had taken the first step in asserting control over a situation that had spiraled into chaos. Her decision to exclude Clint Eastwood, Billy Crystal, Mel Brooks, and Donald Trump from the funeral was a bold declaration in a world that thrives on intrusion and spectacle. And yet, even as the headline screamed, the personal ramifications for Romy, Nick, and the Reiner family were far from over. What had begun as a private tragedy would unfold into a narrative of Hollywood drama, legal investigation, and moral questioning that would captivate and horrify audiences alike. Imagine waking up to a day that seems perfectly ordinary. The sun rises over the sprawling Brentwood estate, birds chirp outside, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee drifts through the hallways. Yet, in a matter of moments, everything changes. Romy Reiner, the youngest daughter of Rob and Michelle Reiner, 27, would soon face a reality that no one should ever endure, a discovery so shocking it would haunt her forever. On that fateful morning, she walked through the grand entrance of her family home and stumbled upon the lifeless bodies of her parents. Rob, 78, and Michelle, 70, both stabbed to death, lay in the rooms they had filled with decades of memories, love, and family life. The initial shock was paralyzing. Imagine standing there, staring at the unimaginable, your mind racing for explanations, for clarity, for some shred of sense in a world that had suddenly become incomprehensible. Romy's first instinct, after the paralyzing fear subsided, was to call the authorities. But even as she did, a sense of dread settled over her. She knew, deep down, that this was no random act of violence. There was something unnerving in the way the scene presented itself, something that hinted at betrayal, a betrayal that might have come from within the very family she loved. Romy's discovery would soon set in motion a series of events that shocked not just the world, but the entire Hollywood elite. Rob Reiner, known for timeless films and his enduring presence in the entertainment industry, had always maintained a carefully curated public persona. Michelle, quiet but elegant, had lived a life interwoven with both the glamour and pressures of Hollywood society. Yet in that moment, all of that mattered little. What mattered was survival, understanding, and the horror of facing a reality she had never imagined. As she dialed 911, her hands shook, her voice quivered, but her mind remained eerily precise. She needed to convey what had happened while protecting the fragile remains of her family's dignity. Authorities arrived swiftly, but the chaos had already begun. News of the Reiners' tragic deaths spread like wildfire, igniting the curiosity and speculation of the public. Reporters descended on Brentwood, cameras flashed, and the quiet, exclusive neighborhood was suddenly a hub of intense activity. In the midst of this turmoil, one detail captured immediate attention: Romy's statement about a dangerous family member who should be considered a suspect. Her words were careful, deliberate, yet filled with an unmistakable urgency. The implication was as shocking as the discovery itself. The threat was not external. It was internal. And for the world watching, it was a betrayal that no one could have anticipated. Nick Reiner, 32, the couple's son, lived in the guest house on the property. His arrest later that night stunned everyone. But before the world could digest the full scope of the tragedy, Romy faced the complex emotional task of processing grief, fear, and anger all at once. How could her own brother be connected to something so horrifying? How could the family she had known, loved, and trusted harbor such darkness? These questions hung in the air, unanswered and heavy. For Romy, the immediate task was not just about grieving. It was about survival, about making sense of the senseless, and about protecting herself and what remained of her family's legacy. The discovery of Rob and Michelle's bodies also marked the beginning of a legal and investigative maelstrom. Police meticulously combed through the estate, looking for clues, trying to piece together a timeline of events. Each detail, no matter how small, could be critical in understanding the circumstances that led to such a violent act. Romy's insight was invaluable. Her statement regarding her brother as a potential suspect guided investigators toward a line of inquiry that would ultimately change the trajectory of the case. But even as law enforcement worked to unravel the mystery, Romy's personal world was collapsing. Every memory of her parents, the laughter, the guidance, the love, was now tainted by the horror she had witnessed firsthand. As the investigation progressed, the media spotlight intensified. Headlines screamed accusations, rumors, and speculative narratives. The public, always hungry for scandal, fixated on every possible angle: the murder, the family dynamics, the potential motives, and the unfolding legal proceedings. Amid the speculation, one detail became a focal point: the identity of the person Romy considered dangerous. Her words were both chilling and compelling. There was no doubt she was serious, and her instincts would prove crucial in directing law enforcement toward a suspect who was as close to her as any family member could be. The day of the discovery also highlighted the fragility of public versus private perception. The Reiners had maintained an image of Hollywood sophistication, success, and stability. Their lives, at least publicly, seemed carefully curated. But the violent events of that morning revealed the stark contrast between image and reality. In one devastating moment, the veneer of perfection was stripped away, exposing vulnerability, tension, and the complexities of familial relationships that even wealth and status could not shield. For Romy, the task was not only to navigate her grief, but also to contend with the intrusion of a world fascinated by her family's misfortune. As authorities continued their work, Romy began to understand the gravity of her role in the unfolding drama. She was not only a witness, but a gatekeeper of truth, a voice capable of influencing the investigation. Her statements about her brother were treated with the utmost seriousness, and soon, Nick Reiner's movements, actions, and whereabouts were scrutinized in detail. The complexity of the situation was staggering. It was not merely a murder investigation. It was a tangled web of familial betrayal, emotional trauma, and public fascination, all intersecting in a way that was almost cinematic in scope. And yet, amid the chaos and grief, a separate but equally compelling story was emerging: the question of the Reiners' funeral. Romy Reiner, in her grief and anger, would make a decision that stunned the public. Four prominent figures, Clint Eastwood, Billy Crystal, Mel Brooks, and Donald Trump, were informed that they would not be welcome at the funeral. Each of these individuals carried significant weight in Hollywood or public life, each with a historical or personal connection to Rob and Michelle. But Romy's resolve was unyielding. The reasons, she implied, were deeply personal and rooted in a combination of fear, anger, and the desire to maintain control over an already chaotic situation. This decision sparked widespread speculation. Rumors about personal feuds, conflicting egos, and potential media exploitation circulated rapidly. Social media platforms buzzed with commentary, analysis, and, in some cases, outrage. People questioned whether such a bold move was appropriate, ethical, or even understandable. Yet, beneath the surface of this public debate lay the raw emotional truth. Romy's decision was born from a place of vulnerability, protection, and an intense need to safeguard her family's dignity amid incomprehensible loss. The tragic discovery of Rob and Michelle Reiner's bodies was, therefore, not just a starting point for an investigation. It was a catalyst that exposed hidden family dynamics, emotional fractures, and the challenges of navigating grief in the public eye. Romy's role as the discoverer, witness, and protector of the family's legacy became central to the narrative. Her courage in facing the unimaginable, her clarity in identifying potential threats, and her bold decisions regarding the funeral set the stage for a story that was as compelling as it was heartbreaking. Every detail of that morning, the location of the bodies, the state of the home, Romy's immediate reactions, and her subsequent statements, would be scrutinized, analyzed, and retold countless times. But the human element, the raw emotional core of the story, is what resonates most deeply. It is the fear, the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the courage of a daughter confronting the death of her parents and the possible involvement of her own brother. It is this human drama that elevates the story from a simple true crime event to a narrative that captivates, horrifies, and engages audiences in a way few stories can. And as the investigation unfolded, and as the public fixated on every detail, one fact remained undeniable: the tragic discovery of Rob and Michelle Reiner's bodies was only the beginning. What Romy saw, what she did, and the decisions she made in those first moments would ripple outward, influencing legal proceedings, media coverage, and the perception of a Hollywood family in crisis. Every choice, every statement, and every interaction carried weight, and the consequences would continue to unfold in ways no one could have predicted. The arrest of Nick Reiner, 32, sent shockwaves through Hollywood and beyond. Imagine the surreal moment when law enforcement officials, after meticulously reviewing Romy's statements and evidence from the Brentwood estate, concluded that the son of the murdered couple might be the perpetrator. For many, the idea that a child could commit such an act against their own parents seemed unfathomable. Yet, in the world of true crime, the line between disbelief and reality is often razor-thin. Nick's arrest that night was not just a legal action. It was a cultural shockwave, a story that gripped public attention and stirred emotions in ways few narratives could. Nick Reiner had always lived somewhat on the periphery of his family's public image. While Rob Reiner's legacy was cemented in Hollywood history, and Michelle maintained a quiet, dignified presence, Nick's life had been less scrutinized until that fateful night. Friends and acquaintances described him as complex, often withdrawn, yet fiercely private. Behind the veneer of charm and normalcy, there were hints of tension and estrangement within the family. Some suggested that his relationship with his parents had been strained for years, though no one could have predicted it would escalate into something so violent. The night of the murders, investigators pieced together a timeline that was both chilling and perplexing. Nick, living in the guest house on the estate, had access to the property, an intimate knowledge of the layout, and a direct line to the family's daily routines. Law enforcement noted these details not as accusations, but as facts. Proximity, opportunity, and potential motive. Romy's early statement to police had already framed him as a person of interest, her instincts sharp even in the midst of personal trauma. She described behaviors, past incidents, and subtle threats that, in hindsight, painted a picture of a family on the edge. As authorities delved deeper, the complexities of Nick's character came to light. He was not merely the son of wealthy, famous parents. He was a person with his own struggles, ambitions, and conflicts. Reports surfaced of disputes over inheritance, personal grievances, and long-standing familial disagreements. While no one outside the immediate family could fully grasp the internal dynamics, the fragments investigators gathered suggested tension that could, in the most extreme scenario, escalate to violence. The narrative that emerged was as unsettling as it was tragic. A family torn apart from within, culminating in an act that left the world reeling. Public reaction to Nick's arrest was immediate and intense. Headlines screamed accusations, often blurring the line between reporting and sensationalism. Social media users speculated endlessly, piecing together snippets of information and weaving their own narratives. Was it jealousy? Financial motive? A psychological break? Theories ranged from plausible to outrageous, but all shared a common thread. Disbelief. How could someone commit such a horrific act against those who had given them life? This question, unanswerable in its full emotional weight, became central to the discourse surrounding the case. Nick's demeanor during the arrest added another layer of intrigue. Sources described him as calm, almost detached, yet beneath the surface, observers noted a tension that hinted at inner turmoil. Law enforcement was careful to maintain professionalism, but even they could not ignore the psychological complexity of a suspect intimately tied to the victims. The fact that Romy had specifically identified him as a potential danger added credibility to their actions, but it also introduced a moral and emotional complication. The accused was not a stranger, he was family. And in cases of familial violence, the boundaries of understanding, empathy, and justice are tested in ways rarely seen in conventional crimes. The implications of Nick's arrest extended beyond the immediate family. Hollywood, always attentive to scandal and intrigue, found itself captivated by the story. Nick was the son of a legendary filmmaker, and the public had long admired the Reiner family's seemingly perfect image. The stark contrast between perception and reality created a narrative rich in tension and irony. People who had celebrated Rob Reiner's work and respected Michelle's grace now grappled with the reality that even the most revered families can harbor hidden conflicts. This tension, between admiration, shock, and moral judgment, fueled media coverage and audience engagement, ensuring that the story would dominate headlines for weeks. Legal experts quickly weighed in, offering commentary on the charges, potential defenses, and procedural steps. 2 counts of first-degree murder carried severe consequences, yet the case's complexity, rooted in family dynamics, access to the property, and prior warnings, made it anything but straightforward. Questions arose. Would Nick have a motive sufficient for conviction? How would Romy's testimony be handled? Could investigators establish intent beyond a reasonable doubt? The legal landscape was fraught with challenges, yet the court of public opinion had already passed judgment in many ways, shaping the narrative as much as any courtroom proceedings could. As investigators continued to gather evidence, the narrative surrounding Nick became increasingly layered. Reports emerged about his past interactions with his parents, previous confrontations, and personal struggles. Each revelation painted a more complex picture, challenging simplistic assumptions and highlighting the intricate interplay of emotion, opportunity, and circumstance. For Romy, these revelations were both validating and heartbreaking. Her instincts had been correct. There was danger in her family, but the truth of that danger came at an unbearable cost. The broader context of Nick's alleged actions also underscored the vulnerability of even the most seemingly protected families. The Reiners had wealth, influence, and status, yet these external factors could not shield them from internal discord. The guest house, once a symbol of independence and personal space, became a point of scrutiny. Investigators examined entrances, exits, security systems, and the layout of the property to determine how events could have unfolded. Every detail mattered, as the difference between speculation and evidence could determine the course of justice. Public fascination with Nick's arrest also extended to psychological and sociological analysis. Experts discussed potential motives, behavioral patterns, and warning signs that might have preceded the tragedy. Conversations about family dynamics, mental health, and the pressures of living in a high-profile household became central to understanding the broader implications of the case. Audiences were not only curious about the crime itself, but also about the forces that could drive a person to commit such an act against their own parents. This layer of inquiry added depth, tension, and a human element to an already compelling narrative. Even as legal proceedings loomed, Nick's arrest influenced decisions beyond the courtroom. Romy, grappling with grief and betrayal, made choices that would shape public perception, family legacy, and media coverage. Her insistence on controlling the funeral guest list, particularly in barring Clint Eastwood, Billy Crystal, Mel Brooks, and Donald Trump, was directly influenced by her experience with Nick and the fear of further intrusion or exploitation. The connection between Nick's alleged actions and Romy's subsequent decisions highlights the interplay between personal trauma, public scrutiny, and the exercise of agency in moments of crisis. As the days following the arrest unfolded, the narrative continued to evolve. Investigators pursued leads, the media dissected every development, and the public remained captivated. Nick's alleged involvement raised profound questions about morality, trust, and the boundaries of familial relationships. How does one reconcile love for a family member with suspicion of unimaginable violence? How does one grieve while navigating suspicion, investigation, and public attention? For Romy and the Reiners family, these questions were not theoretical. They were lived experiences, daily realities that added layers of complexity to an already devastating situation. Ultimately, the arrest of Nick Reiner marked a turning point in the story. It was the moment when tragedy intersected with suspicion, grief intertwined with betrayal, and personal loss became a public spectacle. The legal ramifications, media attention, and emotional toll would continue to unfold, shaping not only the investigation, but also the broader narrative of the Reiner family. Yet, even in the midst of this chaos, one truth remained undeniable. The night of Rob and Michelle Reiner's deaths had irrevocably altered the family dynamic, casting shadows that would influence every subsequent decision, emotion, and revelation. But what no one could anticipate was how Romy's response to this unfolding nightmare, her fury, her resolve, and her bold choices regarding the funeral, would create a separate layer of drama, one that would involve some of the most famous names in the world and lead to controversies as gripping as the crime itself. Romy Reiner was 27 years old when her world collapsed. The youngest child of Rob and Michelle Reiner, She had grown up surrounded by Hollywood glamour, iconic figures, and the carefully curated life of a family who seemed untouchable to outsiders. But on that fateful day, all of that facade shattered. Imagine walking through your childhood home, only to be confronted with the unimaginable, the lifeless bodies of your parents, brutally murdered, lying in the rooms that had once been filled with laughter, warmth, and love. For Romy, this moment was not just a personal tragedy. It was a crucible that would define the rest of her life. From the very beginning, Romy's instincts were sharp. In the chaos and shock of discovering her parents' bodies, she immediately identified the potential danger within her own family. She told investigators that a family member should be considered a suspect, hinting at complexities and tensions that the world could barely begin to understand. Her words, calm yet deliberate under extreme duress, would guide law enforcement toward her brother Nick, setting in motion the events that would dominate headlines for weeks. But beyond the legal implications, Romy faced a far more immediate and personal challenge: how to process grief while confronting betrayal, fear, and the weight of responsibility for her family's legacy. In the aftermath of the murders, Romy's emotional state was a volatile mix of sorrow, anger, and determination. Losing her parents in such a violent and unexpected manner left her reeling, but the knowledge that her own brother was implicated intensified the emotional stakes. She was not merely a grieving daughter. She was a witness, a protector, and, in many ways, the gatekeeper of the Reiner family narrative. Every decision she made, from interacting with law enforcement to managing media inquiries, was informed by a combination of raw emotion and strategic thinking. It was this delicate balance that would ultimately shape the most controversial aspect of the story: the funeral. The funeral, in the weeks following the murders, became a flashpoint of public interest and scrutiny. Romy's anger and determination crystallized around the guest list, particularly in her decision to exclude 4 high-profile figures: Clint Eastwood, Billy Crystal, Mel Brooks, and Donald Trump. Each of these individuals had a connection to the Reiners. Through friendship, professional relationships, or mutual respect in Hollywood circles, but Romy was unwavering. She did not want them present, and she made that decision known. This bold move sparked widespread speculation. Why would a grieving daughter refuse entry to some of the most recognizable names in the world? Was it personal, symbolic, or protective? In truth, it was all of these things at once. Romy's fury was not simply about celebrity or status, it was deeply personal. She had witnessed her parents' lives, their vulnerabilities, and their interactions with the people around them. Her intuition, honed by years of observation and experience within a family that navigated fame and influence, told her that certain presences at the funeral could distort the moment, overshadow the grief, or potentially exploit the tragedy. Her anger was protective. It was aimed at safeguarding the memory of her parents and ensuring that the funeral remained a space of authenticity, reflection, and respect. The decision to bar high-profile figures also underscored Romy's understanding of the interplay between grief and public perception. In Hollywood, personal tragedies often become spectacles, media fodder, and points of public debate. Romy's choice was an attempt to reclaim control over her family's narrative in a world that thrives on intrusion and sensationalism. It was an assertion of autonomy in a moment when she had lost nearly everything, and it reflected both her courage and her strategic thinking. By setting boundaries, she was not only protecting her own emotional state, but also honoring her parents' legacy in a way that external observers could not fully comprehend. In addition to managing the funeral and media attention, Romy faced the ongoing challenge of navigating her relationship with her brother Nick. The emotional complexity of suspecting or knowing that a sibling may have committed such an unthinkable act is profound. Romy's grief was intertwined with confusion, fear, and anger. She had to reconcile love for her brother with the horrifying reality of the situation, a task that no one should ever have to face. The emotional toll was immense, and every interaction, every statement, and every decision carried the weight of both personal loss and public scrutiny. As the funeral approached, tensions escalated. Media speculation ran rampant, fueled by Romy's public statements and the high-profile nature of the uninvited guests. Social media erupted with theories, criticisms, and support. Was Romy justified in her actions? Were the excluded figures genuinely inappropriate for the ceremony, or was this a symbolic act of defiance? The public's fascination was relentless, but for Romy, the stakes were intensely personal. This was not a performance. It was a deeply felt decision made under extraordinary circumstances. The anger she felt at the loss of her parents, at the betrayal within her family, and at the potential intrusion of outsiders was both raw and calculated. Romy's fury also reflected the broader challenges of grieving in the public eye. The Reiners were a family of significant prominence, and every action they took was scrutinized, interpreted, and judged. Romy had to navigate her own emotional responses while managing the expectations and curiosity of a world that felt entitled to her grief. Her decision to exclude certain figures was a statement of agency, a declaration that even in tragedy, the family's boundaries would not be ignored. It was a refusal to allow grief to be commodified or manipulated, and it demonstrated a rare blend of emotional intelligence and resilience. The emotional complexity of Romy's position cannot be overstated. She was young, grieving, and burdened with responsibility, yet she acted with a clarity and decisiveness that few could have expected. Her choices reflected not only her understanding of family dynamics, but also her awareness of the broader cultural and social implications of the tragedy. By asserting control over the funeral, she created a space that honored her parents on her own terms, protected against potential exploitation, and communicated her own moral and emotional stance to the world. Even as Romy navigated this labyrinth of grief, anger, and public scrutiny, the narrative surrounding the Reiner family continued to unfold in unexpected ways. Investigations into the murders progressed, media coverage intensified, and public fascination grew. Yet through it all, Romy's voice remained central. Her decisions, her fury, and her resilience became a lens through which the public could understand not just the tragedy, but the human responses it elicited. Her story added depth, complexity, and emotional resonance to a narrative that might otherwise have been reduced to sensational headlines and speculation. Romy's actions also highlighted the intersection of personal and public spheres in a way that few tragedies can. The decision to bar Clint Eastwood, Billy Crystal, Mel Brooks, and Donald Trump was not a simple act of exclusion. It was a calculated measure to preserve the integrity of a grieving family's moment of mourning. It reflected the tension between celebrity culture, personal boundaries, and the ethical considerations of mourning in the public eye. Romy's fury was both deeply personal and emblematic of broader societal challenges, making her choices a focal point of discussion and analysis. Ultimately, Romy Reiner's response to her parents' deaths was a testament to resilience, intelligence, and emotional fortitude. She navigated the unimaginable, confronted betrayal, and asserted control in a situation that threatened to overwhelm her at every turn. Her decisions regarding the funeral, the exclusion of prominent figures, and her management of public perception were not merely reactive. They were proactive measures designed to honor her parents, protect her family, and navigate a landscape fraught with emotional, legal, and social complexities. But as Romy prepared for the funeral, her fury, her grief, and her sense of duty would collide with forces she could not control. The public, the media, and even some of the excluded guests had their own expectations, motivations, and interpretations. The stage was set for confrontations, revelations, and shocking developments that would further test her resolve. And in this crucible of emotion and power, one truth became clear. Romy's decisions would not just shape the funeral, they would redefine the narrative of the Reiner family tragedy forever. In the glittering world of Hollywood, names carry weight. They open doors, command attention, and, in moments of crisis, can amplify both scrutiny and spectacle. Yet, in the aftermath of Rob and Michelle Reiner's tragic deaths, four of the most prominent figures in entertainment and public life, Clint Eastwood, Billy Crystal, Mel Brooks, and Donald Trump, found themselves uninvited to the funeral. The decision sent shockwaves through Tinseltown and beyond. How could these towering personalities, with histories intertwined with the Reiner family, be excluded from such a profoundly personal moment? And why did Romy Reiner, in her grief and fury, make this choice? Clint Eastwood, the legendary filmmaker and actor, had crossed paths with Rob Reiner countless times throughout their careers. Both men had left indelible marks on the industry. Eastwood with his stoic, commanding presence and cinematic mastery, Reiner with his innovative direction and ability to capture emotion on screen. Their professional camaraderie was well known, and while they may not have been close personally, Eastwood's presence would have been seen as a tribute to Rob's career. Yet Romy's decision to bar him reflected a deeper, more personal reasoning. It wasn't a slight against his legacy, but a refusal to allow external figures, no matter how famous, to intrude upon a family's grief. Billy Crystal, known for his humor, charm, and enduring influence in Hollywood, had a friendship with Rob that spanned decades. They shared red carpet moments, charity events, and professional collaborations. Crystal's presence at the funeral might have been expected, even welcomed by the public. But Romy viewed the situation differently. The tragedy was intensely private, and the inclusion of high-profile entertainers risked shifting focus from the mourning of parents to the spectacle of celebrity. For Romy, the memory of her parents could not be overshadowed, and the decision to exclude Crystal was a protective measure as much as an emotional statement. Mel Brooks, a titan of comedy and filmmaking, had been a contemporary of Rob Reiner and shared the bonds of an industry built on creativity, collaboration, and mutual respect. Yet, like the others, Brooks was denied entry. The exclusion of such a revered figure was startling to outsiders, but for Romy, it was a matter of principle. The funeral was not a social event. It was a family's attempt to navigate grief, betrayal, and the aftermath of a crime that had torn their world apart. Brooks' stature, though immense, could not supersede the need for emotional privacy and control. Donald Trump's inclusion in this group raised eyebrows and fueled speculation. Unlike the Hollywood figures, Trump's connection to the Reiners was less about industry ties and more about social and political intersections. His exclusion was emblematic of Romy's broader intent, to shield the family from figures whose presence could complicate, politicize, or commercialize the mourning process. The decision was bold, controversial, and, to some, audacious. Yet it underscored Romy's determination to maintain authority over a narrative that could easily be hijacked by fame, influence, or ego. The public reaction to these exclusions was immediate and intense. Headlines screamed, social media erupted, and speculation ran rampant. Commentators questioned the ethics, the reasoning, and even the audacity of Romy's decisions. Was it vindictive? Was it protective? Was it symbolic? Each theory carried weight, yet none could fully capture the emotional truth behind her choices. Romy's decisions were rooted in grief, anger, and an unwavering commitment to her family's privacy. The uninvited status of these figures became a focal point, a symbol of her resolve to assert control amid chaos. Behind the scenes, the logistics of enforcing these exclusions were complex. Security personnel were briefed, invitations were carefully monitored, and communication with the excluded individuals was handled with sensitivity to prevent unnecessary scandal. Yet, in Hollywood, news travels fast. Rumors circulated about attempts to bypass restrictions, about potential confrontations, and about the reactions of the uninvited guests themselves. Each new development added layers of tension, drama, and unpredictability to the unfolding narrative. The exclusion of these figures also revealed a delicate balance between public perception and personal emotion. Hollywood thrives on visibility, notoriety, and influence, yet the Reiner family's tragedy demanded discretion, respect, and privacy. Romy's decision was a deliberate intervention in this balance. By controlling the guest list, she ensured that the focus remained on mourning, reflection, and the preservation of her parents' legacy. It was a calculated act, blending emotional instinct with strategic thinking, and it highlighted the profound challenges of grieving in a world that is always watching. Speculation about Romy's motivations was rampant. Some suggested that past conflicts, ideological differences, or personal disagreements influenced her decisions. Others argued that it was a statement about the intrusion of fame into intimate moments. Yet all these interpretations, while compelling, only partially captured the truth. Romy's exclusion of these high-profile figures was primarily about protection, protecting the sanctity of her family's grief, shielding against external pressures, and asserting authority over a moment that was being intensely scrutinized by the public and media alike. The media frenzy surrounding the uninvited guests was relentless. Analysts debated whether this would cause tension within Hollywood, whether statements would be issued, and how social media would amplify the story. Rumors emerged of silent confrontations, awkward encounters, and private communications between Romy and the excluded figures. Yet the daughter's resolve remained firm. She was grieving, she was furious, and she was determined not to let external personalities disrupt the emotional integrity of her family's mourning. Beyond the immediate shock and speculation, the decision to bar these figures also had symbolic weight. It sent a message about boundaries, about agency, and about the right of a grieving family to dictate the terms of their private rituals. Romy's actions highlighted the tension between celebrity culture and human vulnerability. She was asserting, in no uncertain terms, that even the most influential individuals were not above respect, discretion, and acknowledgement of emotional boundaries. As the days leading to the funeral passed, tension mounted. Would the excluded figures accept the decision quietly? Would the media respect the family's wishes? How would other attendees navigate the complex dynamics of fame, grief, and loyalty? Every moment added another layer of uncertainty, another potential catalyst for drama, and another test of Romy's resolve. The decisions she made, though deeply personal, had ramifications that extended far beyond the walls of the Brentwood estate. In the midst of this storm, Romy's fury was both a shield and a statement. It protected her from intrusion, communicated her priorities, and set the tone for the funeral. But it also signaled to the world that this family's tragedy was not simply a spectacle. It was an intensely personal, profoundly human story. The exclusion of Clint Eastwood, Billy Crystal, Mel Brooks, and Donald Trump became emblematic of the intersection of grief, power, and public scrutiny. It was a bold declaration that even the most famous figures were secondary to the sanctity of family and the integrity of mourning. Yet, even with these measures in place, the story was far from over. Rumors of attempted intrusions, media leaks, and whispered speculation continued to swirl. Hollywood was watching, and the public was captivated. Every decision, every statement, and every reaction had the potential to escalate the drama further. And within this whirlwind, Romy's resolve, her fury, and her ability to navigate the complex interplay of grief and publicity would be tested in ways no one could anticipate. The Reiner family estate, a sprawling $13.5 million Brentwood compound, had long been a sanctuary. Behind its elegant gates and manicured lawns, Rob and Michelle had built a life filled with love, success, and careful appearances. But beneath the surface, as the tragic events of that fateful night would reveal, there were fractures, tensions, disputes, and secrets that had remained hidden from the public eye. Romy's discovery of her parents' bodies was not just the revelation of a crime. It was a portal into the hidden dynamics of a family whose perfection had been largely an illusion. Even before the murders, observers noted subtle complexities in the Reiner household. Nick Reiner, the couple's 32-year-old son, had always been somewhat of an enigma. Friends described him as intelligent yet erratic, charming yet withdrawn, with tendencies that occasionally alarmed those closest to him. While Rob and Michelle maintained a loving and protective relationship with their children, Romy had long sensed the undercurrents of tension. In private moments, whispers of disagreements over inheritance, personal choices, and unspoken resentments had surfaced. What no one could have predicted was how these undercurrents would erupt into unimaginable tragedy. Romy's statements to investigators painted a picture of complexity and forewarning. She referred to a dangerous family member, emphasizing behaviors and patterns that suggested escalating risk. Her instincts, sharpened by years of observing her family's internal dynamics, guided authorities to scrutinize Nick. Every comment she made, every detail she provided, became a thread in the intricate tapestry of the investigation. And as law enforcement delved deeper, the hidden layers of the family's history began to emerge, revealing a series of conflicts, pressures, and secrets that added both context and chilling depth to the unfolding crime. One of the most striking revelations involved the guest house where Nick lived. While seemingly innocuous, it had become a symbol of separation within the family. A physical manifestation of distance, independence, and in retrospect, tension. Investigators noted that the guest house provided both access and opportunity, a detail that, combined with Romy's warnings, would become central to their understanding of the events leading to the murders. The very space that was meant to offer autonomy also became a conduit for tragedy, illustrating the thin line between privacy and peril within the family's estate. The investigation also uncovered patterns of behavior and interpersonal conflicts that had been carefully hidden. Neighbors and friends recalled incidents that, while minor in isolation, painted a broader picture of strain and unease. Heated arguments over finances, disagreements about personal decisions, and subtle displays of aggression hinted at a family struggling beneath the surface. These revelations, when pieced together, created a mosaic that suggested the tragedy was not entirely random, that the danger had roots in patterns and tensions that had festered over time. In addition to family tensions, the estate itself became a focal point of scrutiny. Investigators examined every corner, from security cameras to entry points, reconstructing movements and interactions in a painstaking effort to understand the night of the murders. The contrast between the home's outward elegance and the violence that occurred within it was stark. Every room, every hallway, every object became part of a narrative that juxtaposed wealth and status against vulnerability and tragedy. Romy's intimate knowledge of the estate, from her childhood experiences to her adult observations, proved invaluable in helping authorities map the events of that night. As the investigation progressed, questions emerged about long-standing family dynamics and psychological undercurrents. Experts were brought in to analyze potential motives, patterns of aggression, and behavioral indicators that might explain the unthinkable. Discussions about sibling rivalry, generational tension, and the pressures of growing up in a high-profile household became central to understanding the tragedy. Romy's role as both witness and family insider provided insight that could not be gleaned from external observation alone. Her perspective illuminated the subtle, often invisible forces that had shaped interactions within the Reiner family. The narrative of family secrets extended beyond the immediate household. Close friends and associates recounted moments that suggested hidden resentments, unspoken rivalries, and private disputes. While these accounts were anecdotal, they reinforced the notion that the Reiner family, like many others, had layers of complexity beneath its public image. The interplay of love, loyalty, and conflict created an environment where tensions could simmer unseen, only to explode under extraordinary circumstances. Romy's revelation of danger within the family was therefore not only a crucial investigative lead, but also a lens through which the public could understand the deeper emotional currents at play. Even the handling of the funeral reflected these hidden dynamics. Romy's decision to bar Clint Eastwood, Billy Crystal, Mel Brooks, and Donald Trump was influenced not only by public perception, but also by an acute awareness of her family's internal tensions. She recognized that the presence of high-profile figures could exacerbate emotional volatility, draw unwanted attention, and potentially complicate interactions already strained by grief and suspicion. In this way, Romy's choices were informed by both external pressures and intimate knowledge of the family's private struggles. The investigation further revealed subtle conflicts over inheritance, property, and family roles. Nick's place within the household, his responsibilities, and his relationship with both parents and siblings came under intense scrutiny. While these elements alone do not explain the tragedy, they contribute to an understanding of the environment in which it occurred. The intersection of wealth, status, familial expectation, and personal struggles created a volatile mix, an environment where past grievances could collide with emotional stressors, resulting in catastrophic outcomes. Romy's role throughout this period was both emotional and strategic. She navigated grief, shock, and anger while simultaneously serving as a conduit of information for investigators. Her insights, informed by years of observing family dynamics, were crucial in constructing a coherent picture of the events and potential motives. In essence, Romy became both protector and chronicler, ensuring that the family's story was understood in its full complexity, even as the public consumed the narrative with intense fascination. The presence of these family secrets also heightened the stakes of public scrutiny. Hollywood, with its fascination for scandal, intrigue, and the human drama behind wealth and fame, closely followed every development. Analysts speculated on the implications of Nick's alleged actions, the motivations behind Romy's decisions, and the hidden dynamics that had shaped the family for decades. Each revelation added depth, tension, and emotional resonance to a narrative that was already both shocking and compelling. Ultimately, the story of family secrets is a reminder that even the most seemingly perfect households can harbor hidden tensions. The Reiner family tragedy, while unique in its circumstances and impact, reflects universal truths about the complexities of human relationships, the interplay of love and resentment, and the unforeseen consequences of unresolved conflicts. Romy's role in uncovering these dynamics, through her discovery, her statements, and her protective actions, underscores the profound intersection of personal insight, emotional intelligence, and the harsh realities of human behavior. As the investigation continued, it became clear that understanding the Reiner family required more than an examination of the crime itself. It demanded an exploration of relationships, behaviors, and histories that had long remained private. Romy's insight, courage, and determination illuminated the hidden layers of the family narrative, revealing a world where love, betrayal, and grief intersected in ways that would forever alter the course of their lives. The day of Rob and Michelle Reiner's funeral arrived under a cloud of grief, tension, and unprecedented media scrutiny. Brentwood, usually quiet and exclusive, was now the epicenter of a spectacle no one could ignore. Cameras lined the streets, journalists jostled for position, and social media buzzed with speculation and anticipation. But behind the public glare, the true story of the funeral was far more intimate, emotional, and controversial than headlines suggested. Romy Reiner, determined to protect her parents' memory, had orchestrated a ceremony that was as much a declaration of control as it was an act of mourning. From the start, it was clear that this would not be a conventional Hollywood funeral. The guest list, carefully curated by Romy, excluded 4 figures whose presence might have dominated the proceedings: Clint Eastwood, Billy Crystal, Mel Brooks, and Donald Trump. Each of these men carried influence, legacy, and public attention, but Romy's decision was firm. This exclusion shocked many in Hollywood and sparked immediate speculation. Why would she deny such iconic figures entry? Was it personal? Symbolic? A form of protest? In reality, Romy's motives were deeply rooted in grief, protection, and a desire to preserve the sanctity of the moment. The ceremony itself unfolded with meticulous precision. Every element, from the arrangement of flowers to the sequence of readings, was designed to honor the couple's lives while maintaining emotional privacy. Yet, the tension was palpable. The media's presence created a surreal backdrop, juxtaposing solemnity with spectacle. Reporters captured every detail, from the expressions of mourners to subtle gestures of emotion, feeding the public's insatiable curiosity. And amid this environment, Romy's resolve was unwavering. She navigated the chaos with a combination of dignity and ferocity, ensuring that the funeral remained centered on her parents rather than the intrusion of celebrity or gossip. Inside the chapel, family and close friends gathered, each carrying their own grief and sense of loss. The emotional weight was heavy, a mixture of sorrow, disbelief, and tension stemming from the tragedy itself and the complex dynamics surrounding it. Romy, seated at the front, exuded a quiet strength, her fury and heartbreak interwoven in every measured gesture. The absence of the uninvited guests was both felt and symbolic, a reminder that the ceremony was not a public performance but a deeply personal act of remembrance. As the service progressed, memories of Rob and Michelle surfaced in stories, anecdotes, and emotional speeches. Friends recounted Rob's legendary filmmaking career, his wit, and his capacity for mentorship. Michelle's kindness, elegance, and unwavering support of those around her were celebrated with heartfelt reflections. These moments of tribute provided a counterpoint to the tension outside, a sanctuary of genuine emotion amidst the media storm. Yet, even in this intimate setting, the undercurrent of controversy lingered. The excluded guests became a topic of whispered conversation, a shadow that hovered over the ceremony and reminded everyone of the broader narrative surrounding the family. The public's fascination with the funeral was amplified by the complex interplay of celebrity, tragedy, and human emotion. Social media users debated Romy's decision, speculated about the reactions of the uninvited figures, and dissected every aspect of the ceremony. The coverage blurred the lines between mourning and spectacle, highlighting the challenges of grieving in a world obsessed with visibility and fame. Romy's insistence on maintaining control was not merely a personal preference. It was a deliberate act of resistance against the intrusion of external pressures into a private moment of grief. One of the most remarkable aspects of the funeral was the way Romy balanced vulnerability with authority. She grieved openly, allowing herself moments of visible sorrow, yet she simultaneously asserted control over proceedings, ensuring that the ceremony remained respectful and focused. This duality, emotional openness paired with strategic firmness, was emblematic of her approach to the entire tragedy. It reflected both her profound love for her parents and her determination to navigate the complex landscape of family, fame, and public attention. The absence of Clint Eastwood, Billy Crystal, Mel Brooks, and Donald Trump was a constant undercurrent. Their exclusion was a statement, a symbolic reinforcement of Romy's authority and a testament to the boundaries she sought to enforce. Guests were acutely aware of the decision, and conversations often circled back to the topic, reflecting the broader cultural fascination with celebrity, power, and mourning. The decision sparked debates about propriety, loyalty, and respect, adding a layer of social drama to an already